Hello and welcome to the Forbes India Cover Story podcast. I'm your host Himani Kothari.
And I'm Payal Ganguly.
Welcome to the show, Payal.
Thank you so much, Himani. Before we begin, I know that you invest in stocks. So I wanted to ask you, did you invest in any of the new age tech IPOs?
I do invest, Payal, but I'm more of what you would call a very boring investor. So I mostly do mutual funds, and when I do stocks, it's mostly blue chips. Though I am not immune to the IPO boom in startups, and I did apply for some of those IPOs. Unfortunately, the only one I got tagged on listing. So I think it's just investing gods telling me to stick to my core competence. But talking of new age IPOs, you've written extensively about them in the last issue of Forbes.
Right. It's less from the profit and loss perspective or their market performance. It's more from the perspective of how investors are getting an exit through these new age tech IPOs.
Right. And just tell me what's happening in that space, because last year we saw such a huge IPO boom in the startup space. Again, in this year, a lot of new big names are lined up for IPOs. I think Zepto, PhonePe, Razorpay are some of those names. Just what's leading to all of this?
Actually, multiple factors, Amani. When we look at the IPO market in India, right? There are three factors mainly at play. One would be obviously the vintage of the startups which are going for an IPO right now. For the 2025-26, they're mostly founded between 2010 to 2015. So yeah, they have to give an exit to their investors on the cap table. Second would be, the awareness which has come up among the retail investors, such as you. You are more open now to startup IPOs, and I think also the average Indian, right? They hear so much about startups thanks to TV shows, etc. So they're willing to take that bet. But most importantly, I would say it's the domestic capital, especially from mutual funds, which is flowing into these IPOs, which is making them successful. Also, if we compare the Indian market to the US market, Indian market is a good place to be right now because in the US market, the number of new age tech IPOs has gone down significantly from 2022. However, I think 26 has a couple of big ones coming up, like in OpenAI. SpaceX is definitely making the right noises, so it should pick up now.
But I thought the size of the companies going public, the tech companies at least going public in the US, was much bigger than Indian companies.
Which you're right, because when we were speaking to the investors for the cover story, that was their moot point that in India, something as low valued as $700 million, and this is just for perspective, not the company itself, can successfully list on the public market, whereas that benchmark in the US mature markets is as high as $10 billion. So anything less than that would have to look for an acquisition to give their investors an exit.
So is that because investors are kind of pushing companies for IPOs even before they're ready?
Not really. I wouldn't say that's right because they have the option of selling in an offer for sale ahead of IPO. Yes, so that does create a gateway for them to exit the company to some extent. However, what it gives them is, future potential for the company. For example, something like a Meesho or a Physics Wala, they have great growth potential going ahead. So, which is why the investors, are kind of happy about them listing publicly.
So speaking about companies that are raising capital for growth purposes, I read your interview with Elevation Capital, and they actually continue to hold investments in a lot of companies even after they went public.
Right, right. Actually, again, it's the same. It's a continuation of what we were just speaking, right? It's indexing for future growth. So they're waiting for a value appreciation in the company. So most of these investors do not mind holding on to their shares till the lock-in period, which is typically a year or something, and then they probably participate in block deals, etc. So if you see the difference between say an offer for sale versus a fresh issuance for around 18 new age tech companies which went IPO in 2025 was a decent ratio of 55% to 45% of fresh issuance. So yeah, I wouldn't say that everybody is waiting to get an exit and sell and run. So.
Okay. And you've also written that secondary funds are coming up in a big way now. Why didn't these take off earlier?
So when you compare to the US, right, it's cyclical. So it is seen that, once the venture capital ecosystem matures, secondary funds follow those, probably say a 10-year later or 15 years later. That's where India is right now. And I think there's a lot of interest from Indian funds which are new coming up, and also global secondary funds which are looking at the Indian market. Also, speaking a little bit more about secondary funds, the reason I think they're doing well in India and they've closed some big deals right now is because, it brings patient capital on board. So it gives a new lease of life to most of these startups for an additional, say, 7 to 8 years, so that, they have time to build without worrying about an exit.
And speaking of patient capital, Payal, there seems to be a case for holding funds, even continuity vehicles, right?
Right. So multiple people we spoke to as part of the reporting. I think the continuity funds and continuity vehicles help the investors double down on their portfolio winners, and that is very important because otherwise the life cycle ends and they have to find exit scenarios. When it comes to holding funds, right, as in the case of Elevation Capital, it also invests in external companies which they might have missed out on and which are on the track to IPO. So I think that works out for the investors.
Right. All this money talk is making me all the more curious. Payal, tell me a little more about what's happening in the IPO space.
Not that I invest, Himani, but let's take this offline and I can always give you advice because advice is for free, right?
Lovely. Let's take this offline. Thank you for doing this, Payal. And we'll continue to keep bringing you more cover story podcasts.